And now we would like to say hi and good morning to Monim Haroon, social activist and head of the Sudanese community's coronavirus committee. Hi, Monim. Hi, good morning, Alex. Well, it's the COVID year in the Sudanese community in Israel. It's a crazy year. Certainly a year that you could call absolutely crazy. And the craziness this year came from the financial aspect more than morbidity in our community, because the community was badly hit financially. You have to understand that the vast majority of the community engaged and worked in hospitality, in hotels and restaurants, and these are businesses that stopped working from the very beginning of the crisis. So for over a year, there are people who don't have any income, they don't have any safety nets, they are not entitled to unemployment benefits or anything like that. So how do you deal?
וגם בניגוד לתושבים אחרים בישראל, שהיה להם קשה למרות רשת הביטחון, להם אפילו לא היה את זה. נכון. איך שורדים את השנה הזאת? נכון, זה בהחלט שאלת השאלות, שבעצם, וכאן אני רוצה להגיד באמת תודה לחברה הישראלית. בעצם אנשים עמדו פה כאילו מהחברה הישראלית, בתרומות שלהם תרמו לקהילה, אנשים נתנו את המענקים שלהם שקיבלו מהממשלה לאנשים מהקהילה, ולעולם היום היינו רואים באמת מצב כאילו קטסטרופה ברחובות פה בישראל. אתה מעלה כאן נקודה, מוני, מאוד לא טריוויאלית, שדווקא בזכות במרכאות הקורונה נוצר כאן איזשהו קשר יותר הדוק בין הקהילה הסודנית לחברה הישראלית. בהחלט, ואני חושב שזה גם אולי השנה שבה אנחנו גילינו שבעצם כל מה שאנחנו שמענו וכל דרכי ההתמודדות של הממשלה איתנו היא בעצם לא משתקפת בחברה הישראלית. ואני חושב שכאן הבנו שהרבה אנשים שלא היו ידועים על מצב של מבקשי המקלט, הם חלק מאוד פעיל מקלט בתקופה הזאת של הקורונה. אתה עושה כאן איזושהי דיכוטומיה, הפרדה, דיפרנציאציה בין החברה לבין המדיניות המוכוונת מלמעלה. בהחלט, יש פער עצום בין המדיניות של הממשלה ובין הדעה או העמדה של חברי כנסת וחברי ממשלה, ובין הדרך שבה החברה הישראלית יש פער עצום. אני בעצם באמת אוכל להגיד שכאילו האחווה והעדה שיש לנו כמבקשי מקלט לחברה הישראלית היא באמת התגברה אפילו בתקופה הזאת של הקורונה. זה מעניין, כי מה שרציתי לשאול אותך בעצם זה שמלבד התחלואה והמצב הרפואי, הרבה מהקהילות בישראל, ואנחנו עוסקים בזה בהרחבה גם היום, בעצם חוו גם דברים כתוצאה מדעות קדומות, מסטריאוטיפים. בקהילה לא חוו את זה ככה? את האמת שדווקא היו מקרים מאוד מעטים בתחילת הקורונה, בתחילת המגפה, אבל זה לא היה המצב דווקא בתקופה הזאת של הקורונה. זה מה שחשבנו, ואני חושב
throughout this period of time, and I think the reason is the very low rates of morbidity in our community. That's interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yes, I think that they were perhaps the lowest in Israel, and I think that, thank God, there were no fatalities. How can you explain that? I'm sure this has to do with your community, with your culture, because in other foreign worker communities there have been outbreaks. So what did you do? What was your solution? How did you work differently? Well, when the pandemic began, we realized that we are in a difficult situation and that the government doesn't take us into account in terms of grappling with COVID. So we set up community committees with the organizers of our community in order to convey the instructions, the directives of the government to the people in order to take care of them. and because we are not taken into account in the government considerations, and therefore we need to protect ourselves. We need to be more compliant. Every time the project, the head of the project, or the coronavirus project, or the prime minister talked to the community, to the Israeli society, and gave more directions, you realized in your community that if you won't be compliant, and if you won't be responsible, you won't have a safety net to fall back on. Medically or otherwise or financially. Exactly. We used each and every local channel in all the languages that the community speaks in order to convey these instructions and directives very clearly, because we were on our own and we had to understand that we had to cope with this on our own, in terms of the government, of course, not in terms of Israeli society. Okay, so we have a lot to learn from you here in Israeli society. I'd like to ask you, regardless of COVID-19, do you feel more part of Israeli society? I can certainly say that I feel committed. I feel connected to Israeli society and to the values of Israeli society, which we really saw the culmination of in this time of COVID-19. And it's very complicated. It's a sense of belonging that almost constantly there's a kind of alarm going off in your head that it's coming from the government. You don't belong here. You should go back to the place you came from. It's very hard to feel it. But in terms of our commitment and connection to Israeli society, I do feel it. And I think that many of the asylum seekers are also feeling this way. There are even people who are trying to find ways to kind of give back to Israeli society and to contribute something to Israeli society, such as many things. For instance, volunteering in all sorts of places, organizations that are helping Holocaust survivors, people who are fighting, the firefighters, things that we didn't know before. Yes, all sorts of things that people are saying that they want to help, and at the end of the day, they discover that they cannot help. And over the past year, did it contribute? Did it help? This past year has increased the connection between the asylum seeker community and Israeli society, I think. And I think that from here onwards, we need to move forward and to create this connection. Of course, it's contrary to the government's desire, who throughout the years has done everything in its power to disconnect the asylum seekers from Israeli society so that people won't feel like they are part of Israeli society. But perhaps due to this crisis, your subject was kind of diverted. I'm not sure. I think that during this time, the COVID-19 crisis, where there was no distinction made between a citizen or other person, I think it was very difficult for the government it was very difficult for the government to advance a discriminatory policy. And because I saw how the people have really taken our issue on board. So what's the message you'd like to convey to Israeli society this morning? I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to thank Israeli society, truly, from the bottom of my heart. I'd like to say thank you to them for their huge contribution to the asylum seeker community. And I would like to listen more to the stories of asylum seekers. And I'd like to ask them to get to know us more, to get to know our stories more, because we're living here in Israel, and I think that this perception should be changed, that the asylum seekers are a threat to Israeli society. We are people who can be an asset to Israeli society, who can contribute to Israel. And you're not saying existential threat. And this is another point that's come up because of the High Court of Justice and threats and and Jewish issues. So that's not your point. No. And maybe a message to the policymakers, to the decision makers in government. I would like to say that perhaps we should make use of this time, take advantage of this COVID crisis, and to treat us more humanely, because we are here. And the reasons why we are here are genocide in Sudan, a tough dictatorship in Eritrea. And I think that this is the time when they need to understand that we should be treated more humanely. They should change our status because we are here and we are very badly hit by the fact that we don't have a proper organized status that provides us with social rights. Thank you so much. Monim, Haroon, thank you so much for that.